The cowboy tipped his hat, and the cowgirl pretended not to notice. This hat's older than most of the men I've worked beside. You can see the sweat line if you turn it under the light, dark as a watermark, the salt of about 40 summers gone into the felt. There's a scorch on the back brim where a branding fire spit at me once, and I didn't move fast enough. A crease down the crown from a horse that put a foot through it. I keep meaning to get a new one, and I never do, because a hat that's been on your head that long stops being a thing you wear and starts being part of where your head ends. You take it off, you feel like the wind can get at something it shouldn't. I'm telling you about the hat because the day I want to tell you about, I tipped it to a woman, and she pretended not to see. I'd come up the road into the Tolliver place with the truck running hot. Old diesel, 300-some thousand on it, and the temperature needle was sitting up against the red the way it does on a grade in August. So I had the heater blasting to pull heat off the block, and I was sweating like a hog in a sauna with the windows down and the dust coming in. Cattle guard rattled under the tires. There was a dog, a blue heeler, came off the porch low and quiet and ran the fence line beside me without barking, which tells you it was a working dog and not a yard dog. Because a yard dog tells you it sees you, and a working dog just keeps you in the corner of its eye and waits to find out what you are. She was at the round pen. Had a colt on a line, a sorrel, and she was working him in big slow circles, and she didn't turn around. I shut the truck off and let it tick and steam. Got out. My knees told me about the drive the way they tell me about everything now, a long, slow complaint that takes a step or two to quiet down. I stood there at the rail a respectful distance off, and I waited. Because you don't walk up on somebody working a green horse, you let them get to a stopping place. And a person who knows that is a person you can trust around stock, and a person who doesn't is a person you keep an eye on. She let the colt come down to a walk, then a stop, and she walked up the line to him slow and rubbed him between the eyes and turned around, and I tipped my hat to her. Touched the brim and dipped it the way my granddad did to women in town, which is a thing nobody does anymore, and I know it, but my hands learned it before I learned much else, and they do it without asking me. She looked right at me, and then she looked at the colt's near foreleg like there was something on it, and there wasn't, and she ran her hand down it anyway, and that was her telling me she had not seen me tip my hat. I want you to understand the difference. She didn't look away rude. She looked at me square, took my measure in about a half-second the way you'd read a brand, and then decided she had business with that colt's leg. A man my age has been not noticed plenty of ways. There's the kind where you've gone invisible, where the young ones at the feed store look through you to the next thing. That's a small death and you get used to it. And then there's the other kind, where a woman looks at you and decides on purpose to act like she didn't, and that is not invisibility at all. That is the opposite. You have to be seen real clear before somebody bothers to pretend they didn't see you. I didn't know any of that yet. I just figured I'd irritated her. "You Vance," she said, not a question. "Emmett Vance," I said. "Royce down at the sale barn said you might could use a hand." "Royce talks too much." She came to the rail and ducked through it, and up close she was older than she'd worked, late 50s maybe, gray coming in at the temple under her hat and the rest of it the color of a baize coat, dark with red in it. Hands like a man's. There was a wedding band on her, but it was hanging on a piece of leather around her neck, not on her finger, tucked into her shirt, and I clocked that and put it away and didn't think about it again for a while. "I can't pay what a young man'd want." "I'm not a young man," I said, "so that works out." She didn't smile, but something moved at the corner of her mouth, and then thought better of it. "Royce tell you I'm behind on near everything. He told me you run 200 head of cow-calf with one hired kid, and you train colts on the side to keep the bank off you, and that the kid quit, and that you're too proud to ask your neighbors and too broke to hire right. I figured I'd lay it out, because at my age you don't have time to dance. He also said your fences are down on the east end, and you've got cattle drifting onto the county road at night, and that if you don't get that handled, somebody's going to put a Dodge through a black baldy at 60 miles an hour, and then it's lawyers." That last part landed. I watched it land. Her jaw set the way it would set 100 times that fall, a little forward, a little to the side, like she was biting down on something she wasn't going to say. "Bunkhouse is a single wide with no AC," she said. "You feed yourself except Sundays. I'll give you cash, and if I can't make it, I'll tell you before I can't, not after. I don't carry a man who can't pull his weight, and I don't care how old you are or how far you drove. You good with that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me, Marin." "Marin," I said, and I tipped my hat again, and that time she watched me do it and let me and didn't pretend. And her face didn't change at all, but the healer came over and sat on my boot, which I learned later meant more than anything she could have said. Now I have to tell you about my daughter, but I'm going to tell you a little and then leave it, because that's how I carry it, a little at a time, and then I set it down. Her name is Junie. She'd be 38 now. The last address I had for her was in Reno, and that was 4 years back, and the Christmas card I sent came back with a yellow sticker on it. I was on the road her whole childhood, not running from anything, I'd tell myself, working. There was always work somewhere a man could go to, a feedlot, a big outfit shipping, a season of fence on a place in Wyoming the size of a small country. And I went where it was, and I sent money home, and the money was real, and I thought the money was the thing. My wife, Junie's mother, she didn't think the money was the thing, and she was right, and she told me so the night she put Junie's car seat in her sister's Buick and drove out. And the last I saw of my daughter for a long stretch was the back of a little head asleep against the window glass. You'd think a man learns. I'd see them, the years going by on other men's places, the ranchers with their kids on the four-wheeler in front of them, the kids' hands on the handlebars and the man's hands over the kids. And I'd think I had that, and I traded it for a per diem and the open road. And I'd get back to work because work was the only thing that ever shut that up. So when I say I came up the road to the Tolliver place written off, I don't just mean too old to hire. I mean a man who'd already added it up and didn't much like the total and figured the rest of his life was just running out the clock somewhere with stock. Because stock don't ask you where you were in 1994. That's who tipped his hat. I want you to have that so the rest means what it means. The East Fence took us 9 days. I say us because the kid hadn't all the way quit. He was a boy named Dale, 16, lived down the road with a mother and no father in evidence. And he came back when he heard there was somebody to work alongside instead of just being hollered at by a tired woman, which is hard on a boy at that age, harder than the work. So it was the three of us, and Marin did as much as either of us more, and I watched how she worked, because you can know everything about a person by how they work. She didn't waste emotion. She set a brace post like she'd set 10,000, which she had, tamping it in lifts not all at once so it'd hold. She could throw a loop. She doctored a calf with pink eye one-handed while it stood there because she'd worked the halter so soft the calf forgot to fight. And she was angry all the time, low under everything, a bank coal kind of angry that I came to understand wasn't at me and wasn't even at Dale. It was at the place, at the way it was always one wreck ahead of her, at a husband who died and left her the loan and the dream and none of the hands to carry it. I learned that part slow. You don't ask. You just pick up the end of the wire she's stretching, and after a while she lets you carry more of it. There was a morning the post driver wouldn't start, the little gas engine on it, and she yanked that cord until I thought she'd take her own shoulder out, cussing it. And I came over and she rounded on me like I was going to tell her how, and I didn't. I just held my hand out for it, and she handed it over, jaw set, and I pulled the plug and it was wet and fouled, and I dried it on my jeans and gapped it with the back of my pocket knife and seated it, and she yanked it once and it caught. She looked at me. Carburetors next, I told her. Diaphragms probably dry-rotted. I'll do it tonight if you've got a kit. How'd you know it was the plug? Didn't, cheapest thing to be wrong, so you check it first. She nodded once like she was filing me somewhere, and went back to driving posts. And that night there was a foil pan of enchiladas on the step of the single-wide with no note, and the carburetor kit she'd run to town for sitting next to it, and the healer lying across the bottom step like he'd been told to keep me company, which he had not been. He'd just decided. The Colt was the next thing. Not the sorrel she'd been working when I drove in. A different one, a 3-year-old gelding, blood bay, somebody'd brought him to her to fix because they couldn't load him. Couldn't get him in a trailer to save your life. He'd been hauled hard and young by some fool, gotten his head whacked on the divider or scared bad in there, and now the smell of a trailer made him a different animal, 1,000 pounds of no. The man who owned him was a fellow named Castle who had money and horses and not much patience, and he wanted the gelding loadable in 3 weeks because he'd entered him somewhere, and he made it plain he thought a woman alone on a falling-down place was the cheap option and probably a mistake, and he said as much, in front of me and Dale, leaning on his fender. Said it the way men like that say things, half a joke so you can't call them on it. Said maybe she'd ought to get her hired man to do the heavy stuff. looked at me when he said it like I was a tool she'd borrowed. Marin took his money and his horse and said nothing, and Castle drove off in a truck that cost more than the whole Tolliver place, and she stood there a second with her jaw set, and then she handed me the lead rope. "Show me what you got, old man," she said. First time she called me that, there was a dare in it. I don't gentle a horse fast. I never did, and now I'm too old to want to, and that bay had every right on God's earth to hate a trailer, so I didn't take him near one for a week. I fed him by the open stock trailer, parked in the lot, doors chained back so it couldn't move or bang. Fed him a little closer to it every day. Let him eat with his nose pointed at the dark of it and never once asked him to go in. I'd sit on the fender in the evening with the dog and just be there while he ate, talking low, not even to him really, talking to the dog, talking about Junie sometimes when nobody could hear, and the bay'd flick an ear at me and go back to his grain. Marin watched from the porch, pretended not to. I'd catch the cigarette cherry going in the dark up there, she snuck them, two a night, hated that she did, and I'd feel her watching the way you feel sun on the back of your neck. Day 12, the bay walked into that trailer on his own to get a flake of good alfalfa I'd set in the far end, and I didn't make a sound, didn't grab the rope, didn't slam the door, just let him eat in there and back out when he wanted. And the next day he did it again, and by day 18 I could load him and unload him and he'd stand. I didn't tell Marin. I just had Dale go get her, and she came down off the porch wiping her hands on a rag, and I loaded that horse easy as posting a letter, and the bay stood in there switching his tail, calm, eating. She didn't say good job, people like us don't. She climbed up and looked in at him and ran her hand along his neck and looked at me over the top of him, and her face had something in it I hadn't seen, and she said, "Castle's going to take all the credit." "Let him," I said. "Horse knows who did it, so do you." And she did that thing again, looked at me square, and then decided she had business elsewhere, turned and walked to the house, but halfway there she stopped and said, without turning around, "Sunday I'm making pot roast, 6 o'clock, Dale too," and went on in. And I stood there in the lot with the dog and the calm horse, and I'll tell you, I felt about 9 feet tall, which is a foolish thing for a broke-down old man to feel over a pot roast, and I didn't care. I should tell you about the storm, but first I have to tell you about the night before the storm, because that's the night I almost left, and a man telling you the truth has to tell you the part he doesn't come off good in. My phone rang. I almost never get calls. It was a number I didn't know, and a voice that turned out to be a nurse in Reno, asking was I Emmett Vance, father of June Vance, and my heart went up into my throat because there's only one reason a nurse calls about your child, and I figured this was it. I figured I'd missed the whole thing, and now I was getting the end of it. But she wasn't dead. She'd been in a wreck, banged up, going to be all right, and the reason they were calling was Junie'd had no one to list, no next of kin she'd talked to, and a social worker had dug me up because somebody has to be listed. And would I, and here the nurse got careful, would I be willing to be reached if? And I understood what she was asking under what she was asking. She was asking, was I a father or just a name on a form? I said yes, reach me, and I got off the phone and I sat on the step of the single wide in the dark and I shook. Not from fear, from the size of it. From a daughter who'd put no one down, who'd rather have a blank line than my name. And from the fact that I'd earned that blank line fair and square, year by year, mile by mile. Every road I took instead of the driveway home. And the old thing came up in me, the only thing I ever knew how to do with a feeling that big. Go, there's work in Reno. Be near, be useful, fix it. Pack the truck tonight and be gone by light and tell Marin from the road. Run at it. Run, dressed up as help. I had the duffel half full when the healer started growling at the door low, and I opened it, and Marin was standing there in the porch light from the house behind her, and she looked at the duffel on the bunk and she looked at me. And she didn't ask. She just leaned on the door frame. "Heard your truck door," she said. 3 times, you loading or unloading." I sat down on the bunk. I'm not a talker. But it came out of me more than I meant. The nurse in Reno and the blank line where my name should have been, and Junie asleep against the window glass 30-some years gone, and all of it, and Marin stood in the doorway and let me, and the dog leaned on my leg. When I was done, she came in and sat on the one chair, the plastic one, and she was quiet a while. "My husband died on a Tuesday," she said finally. "Tractor rolled on him in the bottom field. I was in town. I have spent 4 years being mad at him for it like he did it at me on purpose, and being mad at myself for being in town, and being mad at this place for needing more than 2 people can give it. You want to know what mad is good for?" She looked at me. Nothing, it's good for nothing. It's an animal you feed and it eats and it never gets full and you wake up one day and it's the only thing you've got left in the house with you. She stood up. You go to Reno, you go. I won't think less of you. A man ought to go to his girl. She picked up my hat off the bunk where I'd thrown it and she held it a second, turning it, looking at the sweat line and the scorch. But don't you run. There's a difference and you know there's a difference. You go because you want to be there, that's a man going to his daughter. You go because you can't sit still inside your own skin, that's just the road, and the road already took her once. Don't let it take the going, too. She set the hat back on the bunk, crown down so it wouldn't lose its shape, which is a thing only somebody who's worn one knows to do, and she went out, and the screen door made that sound it makes, a slap and a little ring of the spring. I unpacked the duffel. In the morning, I called the nurse back and got Junie's room, and she didn't want to talk and I didn't make her. I just told her I was here. I was at a place in the high country working cattle. I was going to be here, and here was the number, and she could call it or not call it, but it wasn't going to ring out anymore. It wasn't going to come back with a yellow sticker. There was going to be a man on the end of it from now on. She didn't say much, but she didn't hang up either. She let me say it. And right at the end, when I said I love you, June, which I had not said out loud to her in I don't know how long, she said real small, okay, just okay. And you'd think that's nothing. It's not nothing. It's a door not all the way shut. A man can live on a door not all the way shut for a long time. The storm came in October, early and mean, the kind that drops 30 degrees in an hour and turns rain to ice, and then to snow with a wind behind it that lays the grass flat. We had cattle on the east end, the side where the fence had been down, and even fixed it was the weak side, and Marin knew before the radio said it that we were in for it. You can feel it. The stock feels it first, and you feel the stock feel it. We worked till dark trying to push the herd down off the high ground into the bottoms where the cedar breaks would give them a windbreak, me and Marin a horseback, and Dale on the four-wheeler with the dog. And we got most of them. But the wind came up while we were still moving the last bunch, and the temperature fell off a cliff, and the snow came sideways, and we lost the light. And that's when a stretch of the new fence I'd built gave way, not my brace, the wire. A tree limb came down across it from the cedar and mashed it flat, and 50 head went through the gap and out, headed downhill the way scared cattle go, downhill and downwind, which was straight for the county road. Marin's radio crackled. Dale, scared, the four-wheeler bogged in a drift. And I did the math the way you do, fast and cold. 50 head loose, full dark ice, on a road where the county does 55 and nobody's looking for black cattle on black ice. Somebody comes around that bend, it's a wreck that kills a family, not just a cow. Get Dale, I told Marin over the wind. Get him out and get him home, he'll freeze on that machine. I'll turn the cattle. You can't turn 50 head alone in the dark, Emmett. I can hold the road, get the boy. She looked at me, snow in her eyelashes. And here's the thing, she didn't argue. A lesser woman argues has to be the one, can't trust a man to do the hard thing alone. She read it, read me, read that I'd done this before and worse, and she made the call a partner makes, not a boss. And she wheeled her horse and went for Dale, and I went down the hill into the dark after the cattle with the dog, because the dog wouldn't go with her, the dog came with me. I won't pretty it up, it was bad. It's bad enough turning cattle on a road in daylight. In the dark on ice with the wind screaming, you can't hear your own horse blow. But I had two things going for me. I had a dog that was worth 10 men, that animal flanked and held and turned and read my hand in the dark like he could see it. And I had 40 years of doing exactly this. Every wreck, every shipping, every storm on every place, all of it in my hands and in the way I sat the horse. All of it the thing I'd traded my whole family life to learn. And for once, for one night, it was worth the price. I bent that herd. Got below them on the road, got the dog above them, and we squeezed them and turned them and pushed them back up the cut toward the gap, the dog and me and a borrowed horse with a heart like a furnace. And I got them off that road and into the breaks where the others were, and I stood the gap myself, horseback in the open, while Marin came back and we strung the limb off the wire and got a panel across it. A car did come, just one. Came around the bend slow, scared by the weather, and his lights swept across us, the cattle dark in the cedars, the fence held, and he never knew how close he'd come to the worst night of his life, and he drove on, and I sat there on that blowing horse in the snow and shook again, the second time that fall from the size of a thing. Marin rode up beside me. We were both iced over, hats packed with snow, the horses steaming. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she reached over and she knocked the snow off the brim of my hat with the flat of her glove, brushed it off the shoulders of my coat, the way you'd do for somebody you mean to keep, and she said, I had a husband who was a good man, and I lost him to this place. I have spent 4 years swearing I'd never need anybody again because needing somebody is just signing up to lose them. She looked out at the cattle, safe, dark, breathing in the trees. And here I am needing you so bad tonight I can't hardly see straight, and I hate it, and it's the truest thing I've felt in 4 years. I didn't have words. I'm not a man with words. So I reached over and I took her gloved hand in mine on horseback in the snow, and I held it, and she let me, and that was the whole thing said. Castle came back for his horse a week after the storm. He came in his big truck, and he had a check and a sour look because the gelding loaded perfect, and that meant he owed it to a woman alone and an old man, and Castle was the kind that can't stand to owe. He counted out reasons it wasn't really fixed, it'd backslide, anybody could have done it given enough weeks, and he said something. I'll not repeat it exact. Something low about Marin, about a widow woman keeping a old saddle tramp around for more than the fencing, and he grinned when he said it so it'd be a joke if she swung at it. I've been a peaceable man most of my life. You don't keep work for 40 years swinging at every fool. But I felt the old heat come up, the wanting to put a man on the ground, and I had it half a step from happening, and that's when Marin stepped in front of me. Not behind. In front. Put herself between me and Castle, but facing Castle, and she was calm, calmer than I'd ever seen her, the banked coal gone cold and hard. That man, she said, and she pointed back at me without looking, turned 50 head off the county road alone in the dark in a blizzard so your neighbor's kids didn't die on their way home from a ball game. He gentled your horse you, and 3 trainers in this county couldn't load. He's mended every mile of fence on the weak side of my place with his own 2 hands, and he's the best hand I've ever stood beside, and I've stood beside good ones. She took my hat off my head, I let her, and she held it against her chest with both hands, and she looked at Castle dead level. And he's mine. So you'll take your horse and your check and your mouth off my place, and you'll do it now, and the next time you come up this road you'll tip your hat to the both of us or you'll keep driving. Castle drove off. She turned around and put my hat back on my head, settled it, 2 hands, like she was setting a stone where it belonged, and she looked up at me from under her own brim. I'm a tall man and she's not a tall woman, and there was a lot of fall sky behind her and the cold smell of it. I'm yours, I said. It was about all I had. Have been since the pot roast, I think. I know, she said. I noticed the day you drove in. I just wasn't done being mad yet. And then she smiled, all the way, the one she'd been biting down on since August, and it took about 10 years off her, and she leaned up and set her forehead against my jaw because she couldn't reach higher easy and didn't care to stand on her toes for any man. And I put my arms around her there in the lot with the dog and the calm horse and the whole patched up, behind on everything, hard-won place around us. And we stood like that a while, 2 old hands who knew the cost of things, holding on. Junie called in November. Didn't say much, asked about the place. I told her about the storm and the cattle and the dog, and she listened, and at the end she asked, careful, was there a woman, because she could hear something in my voice she hadn't heard, and I said yes, her name's Marin, she runs the outfit, you'd like her. She's got no use for fools or for me running my mouth, so we get along about half the time, and Junie laughed. First time I'd heard my daughter laugh in 30 years. Said she might come out in the spring and see it. Might. I said the door's open, June. It's open and it's staying open. She hasn't come yet. Spring's still a ways off as I'm telling you this. But might is a long way up the road from a Christmas card with a yellow sticker, and I've got time now, real time, the kind you measure in seasons on one piece of ground instead of miles between places. The road's done with me. I'm done with the road. So that's the hat. It's on the post by the gate right now where I hang it when I come in. And Marin's in the house. I can see the kitchen light. And the dogs lying in the doorway of the barn with one ear up listening to me run my mouth out here to nobody. In the morning we'll feed, the 2 of us, the way we do, her end and my end. And we'll meet in the middle by the water tank and she'll hand me coffee in the steel cup and I'll tip my hat to her. Every morning I tip my hat to her. And now she tips her chin back every time and lets me see her do it. A man gets to a certain age, he figures the count's done. He's added it up. He knows what he's worth, which by then is mostly what other people decided to write down next to his name, and for a long time the number next to mine was small. Too old, too late, a name on a form a daughter wouldn't fill in. Then a hard woman alone on a hard piece of ground looked at me square and pretended not to, and that turned out to be the start of the only sum that ever came out right. I think I'll get a new hat one of these years. Marin keeps telling me to, but not yet. This one's been on my head through everything that finally added up to something. The wind can get at the rest of me. It's not getting at this.